Hey, welcome to That One Time, the place for unforgettable moments and stories worth sharing. Funny, touching, surprising, just like life itself. Grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's dive in. A strange, previously unknown state, to feel every cell of your body but be completely unable to move, to catch smells, hear sounds, but have not the slightest idea of their sources or meaning. Even the names of objects capable of smelling or sounding like that did not come to mind. What's more, if no names at all came into his head, he had never experienced such comprehensive non-being in his consciousness. The emptiness was absolute, frightening, as if the world he lived in had suddenly collapsed, been wiped into dust, evaporated, taking everything that was before with it. He couldn't remember anything. Who he was, what had happened to him, where he was now, or how and why he had ended up here. Nothing. He was lying down. Yes, he was definitely lying down. That perhaps was the only thing he understood with absolute clarity. Everything else, including his own name, thoughts, and feelings, was shrouded in an impenetrable, thick fog. Finally, as if deciding on something extremely risky, he tried to open his eyes. His eyelids twitched as if overcoming invisible resistance, and into the complete, impenetrable darkness, which only occasionally flashed with quick-colored dots and zigzags, first penetrated almost imperceptible glimmers of light. Increasing and merging, they began to spread into two trembling, flickering slits, and blinding daylight burst into his eyes. Immediately, an unbearable pain pierced his skull, forcing him to close the eyelids he had opened with such difficulty and fright, and silently beg for the return of the blessed darkness he had just so rashly lost. There in the darkness, it turned out, it was so peaceful. Now, his head felt as if it was being torn apart by chaotic, merciless pain. It had neither rhythm nor measure. It was absolute, omnipresent, and unbearable. This, without a doubt, was the strongest pain he had ever had to endure in his life. This, he, remembering nothing and understanding nothing, somehow understood and remembered perfectly clearly. He groaned dully, plaintively, desperately, and a few moments later felt, not just one sweat-soaked, matted strand of hair crawled upwards on its own, but then something cool and soft settled on his forehead, and this touch was pleasant and soothing. It turned out, instantly relieved the unbearable pain, taking away a part of it, and the hammers, saws, and needles raging in his head suddenly began to lose their sharpness and weight, to diminish, to disappear. His convulsively flared nostrils inhaled a light, barely perceptible aroma, in which notes of something fresh, slightly tart, sparkling, both long familiar and completely unknown, were intricately intertwined. Then there was the sensation of life-giving moisture on his lips, a blissful feeling as the liquid flowed down his dry, raw, rough-as-sandpaper throat, and a quick, light prick in the shoulder, exactly like a gnat bite. He groaned gratefully and with relief and heard a voice, thin like the ringing of silver, quiet like the rustle of grass under a light breeze, gentle like a kitten curled up under a palm. "Well, that's good. Very good. Simply wonderful that you're awake. I was starting to get worried. And now you need to rest, sleep. Lullaby, sleep and wake up. Well, almost healthy. Sleep." The wonderful sounds of the voice seemed to drift away from him, fading. His last thought was quite childish. Well, I'll be. Could Mom have come back? This effort stunned him with a final volley of the still strong pain, and he instantly fell into silence and darkness. Tap, tap. A measured, quiet tapping. Squeezing into consciousness, he took a long time to gather his strength, remembering in horror how his previous attempt to open his eyes had ended. Finally, all tensed up and prepared for a possible blow of pain, he opened one eye slightly, listened to his sensations, and feeling nothing suspicious, parted his eyelids. He didn't squint. Only now, from astonishment, staring intently, without blinking, was a creature with huge blue eyes. A gnome. A real gnome. Short, half the height of a human, with a long gray beard, thick drooping eyebrows, a large nose, and a huge red cap. Without taking its eyes off him, the amazing creature gently tapped the floor with a stick and, noticing his bulging eyes, tilted its head to the side, tugged at its beard, and giggled. He closed his eyes as if hoping that the strange vision would disappear when he opened them again. But it got even worse. Now, instead of one, he saw two gnomes. This one was a little taller, or maybe the bright blue cap was just bigger. Clear as day. My mind's gone, the hallucinations have started. And quite strange ones, and characteristically, quite persistent. The apparitions not only weren't going to disappear, but on the contrary, began circling around him with sounds resembling a very familiar tune. Evidently attracted by these strange calls, a third gnome joined in, now in a bright yellow cap. Yes, it's all clear. I've gone mad, he thought, surprisingly calmly, watching the round dance of colorful caps with some pleasure. Well, at least the madness isn't boring, with songs and dances. It could have been worse, some scary spiders or skeletons. But look at these cuties. And they sing great. What's that tune? Incredibly familiar, as if from a distant past. Although it's impossible to forget this. Oh my God, it's A Little Fir Tree Was Born in the Forest. Of course. He managed a crooked smile with difficulty and moved his lips, involuntarily repeating the words of the children's song. All right, everyone out of here, quickly! He heard a voice. He recognized it immediately. That same soft and silvery timbre that had made him feel so calm last time. True, now it wasn't whispering, but there were angry, ringing notes of annoyance in it, clearly directed at the mischievous gnomes. In response, there was a chorus of stubborn snuffling. "You are not to enter this room." The voice came from somewhere to the side, and he couldn't manage to see the speaker. He was still afraid to turn his head. "But this is our room. We have our things here. And I need to get under my bed. Well, anyway, I need to. And did you see the markers? And I don't want to sleep next to Alexei anymore. You know what he does in his sleep? I'll tell you later, in your ear." A clamor arose. "We'll sort it out later. And now everyone grab onto each other and form a train out that door." "Quickly," came the reply. The gnomes obediently grabbed onto each other's clothes. The one in front, with full responsibility for the mission entrusted to him, dragged the colorful train away. Having watched them go, he tiredly closed his eyes. "Looks like I need to somehow learn to distinguish reality from visions and at the same time reconcile myself to the fact that fairy tale creatures are calmly hopping around, singing songs familiar to any child from the earliest childhood." "How are you doing?" a voice asked above him, and he again felt that thin, slightly tart scent of freshness. "Oh yes, you're doing great. You can look right here, at the tip of my finger." "Good. Now I'll move it. Keep your eyes on my finger." "Good. That's it. More. Look at the finger. Why can't you?" He really couldn't. But not because his eyes refused to obey him, not at all. He simply couldn't tear his gaze away from the face leaning over him. A fairy? A nymph? Who is this? What amazing creature is standing so close, so near that he can see the thin bluish vein on her temple? What, a vein? So she's human? No, it can't be. There are no such creatures among people. People, they are rougher, denser, wider, heavier, louder. They are covered in thick skin, covered in hairs, they have bright, fleeting faces, and they constantly show their teeth in unnecessary smiles. By the way, she could well be a representative of any of the listed fairy tale races. After all, she just chased a whole crowd of gnomes out of here. So why shouldn't she herself be a dryad or a sylph? After all, he had already resigned himself to being in some strange, frozen world. Her face, as if carved from mist, drawn with thin calligraphic lines. High, sharp cheekbones, almost straight eyebrows sweeping towards the temples, a small nose, delicately outlined lips, pale, matte transparent skin. Everything about this face was inexpressibly thin, graceful, light. It seemed woven from haze, and if you blew a little harder, the face would melt, disappear, just as fantastic figures, clearly discernible in the swirls of clouds, disappear. She was not a beauty whose image imprints itself on the mind once and for all, and yet it was impossible to forget her, like a sunset or the flowering of a cherry tree, and impossible to keep her close, just like the scent of a flower or a fading evening ray. And yet there was something in this face that firmly held him to the earth, that didn't let him disappear carelessly and thoughtlessly. Her eyes. Huge, gray-blue. However, he wouldn't vouch for their color. It was not excluded that this amazing creature could easily change their color at will. Well, there it is. Just a moment ago they were gray with a blue tint, but a few moments later they darkened and became the color of dark pearls. Probably because their owner frowned in bewilderment, but apparently the worry was unnecessary. Her forehead smoothed, her lips trembled in a slight smile, and now her eyes shone with warm, joyful blue aquamarines. Her eyes spoke without words. In them was sometimes anxiety, sometimes a sly smirk, sometimes a quiet, calm sadness. They laughed and cried, rejoiced and grieved, joked and questioned. And for all this, their owner didn't need to open her mouth and utter words, shed tears, frown or smile like other people. He tore himself away from her face with difficulty and stared at the tip of her thin finger with a short oval nail. "Can you hear me? Hello?" She leaned over his face and looked intently into his eyes. This made him catch his breath and his throat tickle. "Look at me. That's it. Good. And now again. Look right. Now left. Good. Well, seems okay." She mumbled something in her elvish, human. "Pupils are calm. Temperature is normal. No nausea. Eye movement is painless. Let's assume you got off with a slight fright." "Yes." He nodded happily. Not understanding a word of what she said, he would have agreed with anything without hesitation now, just for her to stay close as long as possible. Suddenly it didn't matter to him where he was, what had happened to him. It didn't even matter who he himself was and why he couldn't remember it. If all this was the price for meeting these incredible eyes with that elusive light smile, slightly unsettling, pale, thin lips, with hands smelling of green leaves, lemon juice, and rain, well, for such a price he gladly agreed. And then the fairy surprised him. With strong, deft, not at all ethereal hands, she unexpectedly lifted him by the shoulders and shoved a pillow under them. "Well, now you need to eat," she said. After these words, so simple and earthly, he finally came to his senses. Until this second, he had been as if in a trance, in some enchanted state, helplessly observing the amazing phenomena changing before him. And now the hypnosis was over, and immediately his head, ribs, leg, and for some reason his bandaged fingers on his right hand began to ache, whine, and twitch, and his stomach rumbled so loudly that she listened in surprise and nodded understandingly. A few minutes later, he was drinking with pleasure, burning himself from a large mug of amber chicken broth with flecks of fragrant herbs, probably some kind of magical potion. Then there was another light and quick prick in the shoulder, after which the pain, which had tried to snatch the cup of broth from him, quickly began to subside. "Well, that's good. Now you need to rest and then we'll talk," she said, her eyes shining cheerfully. It seemed his appetite, which, frankly, little could affect, pleased her. She helped him lie back down and, dimming the fragile winter bright day, drew the curtain, although it seemed to him that she did it with some kind of magical movement. "Tell me." He raised himself up, fighting the rapidly overwhelming drowsiness. Were the gnomes really, actually gnomes?" She turned around and laughed, as if scattering silver bells. Yes, the gnomes were real. "Good," he whispered to himself. "So, everything else is true too. So, she is also real." With this comforting thought, he fell asleep. His third awakening was simpler, much more pleasant than the previous two. He lifted his eyelids without even remembering the fear of pain and immediately began to search with his eyes for his fairy, as he mentally already called the striking creature that left a disturbing charm. Disturbing because he still didn't understand anything and for some reason didn't want to start understanding. He seemed to be suspended between his past reality and a new unknown one, and frankly, he didn't want to go back. She probably felt he was awake and appeared. Yes, she didn't walk in. She appeared, as if woven from air. "Good morning." "Afternoon." "Evening," she said, looking intently into his eyes. "Excellent sleep. You could even say outstanding." She pulled up a chair and sat down. "Well, let's talk." She tilted her head to the side. "Do you remember anything?" "Of course, everything," he nodded. "You, the broth, the gnomes, all three of them. Red, blue, and yellow. And you. And that's all? She asked. And that's all, he nodded cautiously. How could he explain to her that for some reason he didn't want to remember anything else, when he had her face, the smell of freshness from her thin hands, and that funny airy song about the fir tree? Well, all right, let's start with the simplest. She was relentless. What's your name? My name? He was surprised. It turned out he had managed to forget that every person is simply obliged to have a name. My name is... Something was spinning and disappeared. I don't remember. He shrugged guiltily. I don't know. Well, isn't that a problem? And I don't know either, she sighed. You see, you didn't have anything on you. No documents, no phone, no card, just nothing that could help us understand who you are or where you came from. Maybe you remember a name, an address, a phone number, anything at all? No. It seems you have amnesia. Temporary, let's hope. Don't be scared. She looked at him doubtfully, obviously seeing no hint of fear on his face. It happens, and quite often, with head injuries, contusions. You need to rest well and try to remember yourself. How did I end up here? With you? He asked, although he really wanted to say, with you. Listen, she smiled. It feels awkward that we're using formal address, like in an interview. Let's switch to informal, all right? Hey, what's wrong? Are you feeling bad? Are you dizzy? She asked anxiously, watching his tense face. Yes, something's wrong. Or rather, it's about to be. What horror! How could he confess to this strange fairy that the most earthly, prosaic need was starting to plague him? What was he supposed to do now? He looked at her with a shy plea. Ah, that's what it is, she nodded calmly. Well, get up, let's go. You're not as unable to walk as you might think. By the way, in that case, all the more reason for us to switch to informal quickly. Such matters are easier to handle between good comrades, aren't they? He didn't even notice how, to the sound of her silver voice, he found himself awkwardly standing on his feet, tucking his tightly bandaged limb under him. Just a bad sprain, she explained, following his gaze. She slipped under his arm with a quick, flexible movement. Supporting each other like that, they hobbled to a place which, to his surprise, existed not only in the homes of ordinary mortals, but also in the dwellings of fairies. There he looked at his reflection and recoiled in fright. Staring back at him from a mirror cracked in the corner was a gaunt type with cloudy, sleepy eyes, a scrape on his forehead partially covered by tangled hair, and a considerable 3-day stubble. Aha, looking good, his hostess nodded cheerfully. But I must admit it somehow suits you. We even gave you a nickname, the Noble Bandit Knight. The boys think you fought bravely but couldn't stand against 100,000 enemies. Well, never mind. You'll get a little stronger now. I'll give you a razor and a comb, and you'll be shaved, decent, and boring again. He really wanted to ask who we were, what boys she was talking about, and why being shaved was boring, but he didn't dare. Well, she said when he lay back down on the bed. So, you don't remember anything? Well, then I'll tell you what I know. Maybe some memories will come back to you. Something will suddenly pop into your head. All right, this is my apartment, so you can stay here as long as you need to, completely at ease. And so, the fairy tale fairy, the enchanted creature, turned into a perfectly real young woman named Victoria. But his involuntary inner trembling at the sound of her voice, the scent of her hands and hair, at the sight of her eyes, that didn't disappear, but only happily strengthened at the thought that all this belonged to someone who wouldn't vanish or deceive him. Not half an hour later, he was thoughtfully tugging at the edge of a fluffy blanket, going over everything he had heard from Victoria in his head. She had found him late in the evening in a snowdrift near the house. He was beaten, unconscious, in just a shirt and jeans. Asking a passerby for help, she had dragged him to the trauma center. At the trauma center, upon learning he had no documents, they wanted to refuse. But at her requests, demands, pleas, and threats, they finally brought him around, bandaged his head and leg, and wrapped his fingers. To a clinic? I don't have one. I'm sorry. That's why I brought you to my place, put you to bed. Well, and then you know the rest, she finished simply. But don't worry. I'm not a doctor, but at least I can provide you with first aid and proper care. After all, I did 5 years of medical school. She sighed lightly, thought about something, but then, as if catching herself, smiled lightly and brightly. "You'll rest for a couple of days. Maybe you'll remember something. And anyway, you need to recover quickly, because New Year's coming soon." Something stirred, turned slightly, moved in his head, but then quieted down again. "I see. So, you live here alone?" he asked cautiously, still unaccustomed to using the informal address with her, posing a very important question for him. What if everything collapsed now? What if his fairy had her own fairy? Maybe he was just away on a business trip or out for a couple of days on errands. "Completely alone," she chuckled, and his heart painfully constricted. "Although, honestly, sometimes I really dream of being alone, even for a little while. You've already seen my company. That's how we live, 4 of us, with the gnomes." "You live with gnomes?" he gasped in shock. "With 3? He clarified. For some reason, the funny ambiguity of his question hung in the air, and suddenly, Vicky began to shake quietly with laughter. He looked at her in surprise, smiled uncertainly, giggled, grabbing his ribs with aching pain, wincing and groaning, and then burst out laughing himself. "Aha! That's the kind of Snow White I am, though slightly shortchanged by fate," Vicky laughed, finally turning into a charming, earthly woman. "I only have 3 gnomes, not enough for a full set." Calming down, wiping away the tears brought on by laughter, Vicky startled him with an incredible fact that didn't fit her at all. It turned out that the gnomes were, of course, not some kind of fairy tale creatures at all, but children, little ones. Twins, George and Alex, aged 5, and Victor, who was the same age. And when he first saw them, they were simply trying on costumes for the New Year's party at kindergarten. Just like that, his delirium amusingly dissipated. "Wait, I don't understand. If George and Alex are twins, and Victor is their age, shouldn't they be triplets?" He tried to understand why the news that Victoria had 3 children didn't shock him at all. Probably because everything about her had to be unusual, not like other women. Even if she was earthly and had a wonderful but quite ordinary name and had even studied at university once, like ordinary mortals, she was still a miracle, extraordinary and incredible. She had 3 little ones. Well, that was also a miracle. Why necessarily triplets? Vicky smiled. "Not necessarily. There's a riddle for you. Lie there and think about it. Very useful in your condition. So, we've done the bandages, you've slurped up the soup, I gave you the shot. Now sleep." He hastily intercepted her thin hand, smelling of that same melody of greens, coolness, and freshness, and pressed it to his lips, and gasped in astonishment. The palm, which he thought he was holding firmly with his bandaged whole fingers, literally dissolved, disappeared, leaving a slight coolness and a sweet bitterness on his lips. He groaned with pleasure and, as usual, fell into silence and darkness. The days flowed by, one bright, calm day after another. His leg ached, reminding him of the sprained tendon, his ribs complained painfully to each other about the rough treatment, and one of his fingers suddenly decided to swell up like a sausage. And yet he had never felt so good. He couldn't explain it. He lived in a small apartment, tried to help Vicky, who was constantly busy, appearing and disappearing, and remembered children's games. The kids were wonderful, healthy, with sly intelligence in their eyes, and there wasn't a drop of what is usually used to brand children from poor and single-parent families. They were more than adequately provided with everything necessary: love, affection, care, and tenderness. And all this was generously seasoned with songs, fairy tales, pancakes, and games of hide-and-seek, rosy apples, and spaceships made of chairs. The twins, Alex and George, were charming blonde rascals, always plotting something. They constantly played tricks on everyone by the fact that no one except their mother could tell them apart. Victor, dark-haired, brown-eyed, slightly taller than his brothers, was completely different, having apparently inherited his looks from some very distant ancestor. And his character was completely different, serious and calm. Perhaps this was somehow explained by the creepy scar that split his upper lip in 2, making him seem to lisp when he spoke. Vicky called him Bunny. However, as soon as the boy entered the orbit of his brothers, not a trace of his thoughtfulness and seriousness remained, and 3 voices and 6 limbs united for common achievements. And suddenly, he began to remember. At the end of the second day of their life together, the little ones started their usual cheerful romp on the floor, but after a while, one of the twins slightly detached himself from the friendly tangle of arms, legs, and heads, and seized by an unexpected creative impulse, began to sing, "Tony, Tony, let's go dig potatoes. Tony, Tony, let's go dig potatoes." His comrades supported him in unison, eagerly and promptly. Vicky laughed and he twitched and lunged forward, but got tangled in the blanket and nearly fell off the bed. "Potatoes. Tony, I remember. My name is Potatoes. I mean, Tony. Anthony. I'm Anthony. Well, hello, Anthony. Nice to meet you." She smiled and her eyes shone, now bright blue like the sea under the sun, and she shook his hand. "Well, Anthony," she repeated his name with pleasure. "The first step is taken. Now everything should go faster. And you know, maybe you should contact the police. They're probably looking for you, worried." Although she involuntarily looked at his washed and ironed, but frankly worn-out jeans and shirt with a collar frayed to sticking threads. "Yes, I understand. I've become a nuisance. I'm sitting here, eating you out of house and home. You're spending money on food, medicine, time, energy, and yes, I should leave. I understand everything, but I don't want to leave." The words burst out unexpectedly on their own and puzzled him no less than Victoria. "Well, if you think so. Of course, you can stay with us a little longer, get stronger. Frankly, I'll be happy if you stay for a couple of days. We've got, as always, 3 runny noses. We can't go to kindergarten, and I can't sit with them right now. Lots of work, and New Year's just around the corner. It's just awful. And as if on purpose, the neighbor, Granny Zoe, is sick. Usually she helps me in such cases. So if you sit with the kids, you'll really help me out." My God, finally he could be useful to her in some way. He suddenly wanted to fall to his knees, kiss Vicky's hands, and thank her for the honor of helping her. Frankly, he didn't understand how she managed everything. Early in the morning, she disappeared somewhere. By lunchtime, she brought a pile of colored paper, frames, folders, and humming something under her breath, cut and glued with enthusiasm. Then she easily stirred pots in the kitchen, splashed water in the bathroom, gathered her mysterious crafts, and ran off. In the evening, the apartment filled with boys. Shrieks, stomping, dirty sneakers and t-shirts, drawings, chomping, songs, arguments, and sometimes desperate roars. Finally, everything quieted down, and Vicky disappeared like the last ray of sun, sometimes for the whole night, only to appear at home as unnoticed as the first morning light entering it. But the clothes, washed at some unknown time, lay in neat piles. Rich soups, porridges, and stews smelled fragrant in the pots. Everything was in its place. And the boys, by some magic, turned out to be clean and combed. How did she do it? A mystery. Perhaps it was one of her magical secrets. Victoria was reluctant to talk about herself, or rather, said nothing at all, just smiled. So there was no doubt about the pointlessness of these stories. Why talk about the past? Isn't it clear that here and now she is absolutely serenely happy, that she is completely content with life, enjoys every day of it, and dreams only that, God forbid, nothing should change? Yet much in her life seemed inconsistent with the concept of absolute happiness. However, how could he judge what this amazing woman truly needed? Maybe she was indeed happy. Frozen fingers, the absence of a warm-down jacket, and the sole of her boot about to fall off, which she was gluing, thinking no one saw. These were certainly no reason to abandon a cheerful walk with the boys. And what difference did it make, for example, that the wallpaper was faded and darkened in the corners? The old refrigerator was shaking in agony, and only one burner on the stove worked properly? So what? Did all this prevent the unrestrained fun that reigned in the house, or make the dishes less tasty? No, quite the opposite. It was so fun and great to draw together on the faded wallpaper, and no one else had paintings like that on their walls. And perhaps it didn't matter at all that light but noticeable shadows had permanently settled under her amazing eyes, and her small collarbones pulled the thin skin so taut that she often looked as if it was about to tear. Well, maybe that's how they were supposed to be, translucent, weightless. But really, where have you seen a fairy with rosy cheeks and excess weight? Realizing that he wouldn't get anything out of Vicky anyway, Anthony looked more closely at everything around her and at the people living nearby. The house was small, two-story, with one entrance, very old, with a wide, creaky staircase. It had only 4 apartments, and everyone knew everything about everyone else and then some. The house was sick, rejoiced, grieved, was indignant. The house lived, and Victoria was its small, brave heart. Anthony was convinced of this very soon. Holding onto the railing, the man was already quite skillfully hopping on his 1.5 legs, accompanying the gang of boys outside. "There they are," shouted the neighbor from downstairs. Irene, whom they called Auntie behind her back, almost trampling them completely. She was known for her quarrelsome, distrustful nature, was habitually in irreconcilable confrontation with one of the neighbors, and of course was extremely displeased with the bunch of continuously noisy boys leaving tracks on the clean floor of the entrance, as well as balls, candy wrappers, stray cats, mittens, scoops, and God knows what else from the children's senseless arsenal. "Excuse me, I forgot to give instructions before going out," Anthony laughed, hobbling up to the woman standing in the pose of an avenging fury. "You could hit them over the head with a log," she grumbled. "They're blockheads, that's what they are. One, the other, the third." "Oh, why say that? Why?" Anthony shook his head. "They're wonderful kids and so close. It's strange that only Victor looks nothing like Vicky or his brothers. Just not a bit. And for some reason, he says he was born on June 10th and the boys on the 25th. "Well, he's not related to her, and not a brother to the twins," the neighbor replied. "Well, I mean, he's not their relative. That bleeding heart fool took him from the maternity hospital along with her own. 2, of course, wouldn't be enough, but 3 is just right. He was abandoned." She looked angrily at Anthony's puzzled face. "Don't understand? Well, they gave him up at the maternity hospital. His own mother gave him up. Look how he was born with a cleft lip, and everyone wants perfect babies, like angels, as if they're going to live in paradise later." The woman smiled bitterly and maliciously. "Well, so she dragged 3 home, like a cat, honestly. Sometimes she doesn't even have enough to feed her own, and she took on someone else's burden." The years of bitterness that had permeated Irene were clearly fighting with something bright and pure now, and suddenly kindness won. The woman smiled, and her usual mask of grimness and suspicion seemed to fall from her face. Although, of course, Vicky saved Victor. Where would he go like that? No one else would have taken him. A straight road to the children's home and then the orphanage. And there, can you imagine what would happen to him like that there? They would have worn the boy out, that's all. And suddenly, as if catching herself, she grimaced. That's where her life began. Not a life, hard labor. Now she's tearing herself apart at 3 jobs, soon there'll be nothing left of her. And we women are all fools. That's how we live, for who knows whom, giving everything of ourselves without reserve, and then we're left with nothing. You slave like a camel, then stand in the kitchen, then sleep almost standing up, like a warhorse. She looked at Anthony, who had already started going down towards the exit of the entrance. No time to think about yourself. To go to the hairdresser, for a massage. Just one day to live for yourself like a real woman. I'm a woman too, by the way. And tell Vicky, if she really is going to decorate the Christmas tree in the yard, she can clean up the trash herself afterwards. Irene's shouts were audible even after the entrance door closed behind him. "Ah, so that's who our Granny Zoe is these days." Anthony heard another woman's voice behind him, but it was completely different. Quiet, calm, slightly shaky. Just in case, he quickly counted the boys rummaging in the snowdrift and turned around. Behind him stood a short, slightly hunched old woman in a funny fur hat. "You're Anthony? Vicky told me about you." She smiled with an incredibly warm, kind smile, the kind only grandmothers can give, making no distinction between their own and other people's grandchildren. "She found you, right? And now she's nursing you back to health? Not surprising, that's how she is. Always has been. Rushes to everyone's aid. It doesn't matter who it is. A child, a sparrow, a man, a kitten, an old woman. Just don't tell Vicky you saw me outside," she asked, smiling. "She'll scold me for going out. She came running to me on her way to work this morning, took my blood pressure, brought pills, ordered me to lie down and not get up. But I trudged out. I really need to go to the post office, send presents to my grandchildren. My grandchildren are far away. My son Steven works there. I want to see my Stevie and the girls so much, I just can't stand it." She sighed and dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. No, I don't blame Stephen, she justified her son, unknown to Anthony. Where would he find the time? It's flying halfway across the country. They're busy people, both him and his wife. They don't forget me, don't you think? They call me often, they worry too. They keep promising, we'll come, we'll definitely come. But when will they? No, I understand everything. I just worry I'll die like this and never see them. She again wiped her eyes with her handkerchief, raised her bright, clear eyes to Anthony, the kind only children and old people have, and smiled shyly. Oh, Tony, forgive me. I've been babbling on and on. She laughed a small, quiet laugh. You just reminded me of my Stevie. Well, it was nice to meet you. Just remember. As she said goodbye, she walked away, carefully clutching a bag, obviously containing gifts for her granddaughters. And he, who hadn't said a word to her, watched her go for a long time, unaccustomedly longing for someone else's separation. The boys, having had their fill of walking, tumbled into the entrance in a noisy crowd, covered from head to toe in soft little balls of snow. Anthony, unable to keep up, hobbled behind them. A leather glove lay on the landing of the first floor. He drops them all the time, one of the boys reported authoritatively from above. He lives in the second apartment. Anthony rang the doorbell, and a few seconds later, a thin woman with a tired face and dull eyes opened the door. Ah, Michael? Anthony stammered, fidgeting with the glove in his hand. The woman waved her hand towards the room. A man was sitting on an old sofa, broad-shouldered, with regular features, with black wavy hair. Even if he were 100% man who preferred to admire female beauty, Anthony couldn't help but admit, the man sitting before him was very handsome. He was out of place and time here, among the faded wallpaper, old furniture, and dusty, stale air. He should be shining with intelligent eyes on a movie screen, be a physical education coach. But the man couldn't do any of that. Not stand, not run, not jump, nothing. Because his legs, helpless, unnaturally thin, deathly still, chained him to the cracked, long unpainted floor more securely than multi-ton shackles. He lifted his head and smiled. Again? He said. No, really, I'll ask Mom to sew an elastic band on. You walk, but in a figurative sense. That is, you ride. Used to ride. What about a wheelchair? Anthony asked cautiously. It's called a wheelchair, the man said without self-pity and with a familiar, old, therefore calm pain. Even though I don't have legs, I still enjoy privileges. I can sit in my chair even in the presence of the head of state. As bitter as it was for him, he couldn't help but smile and laugh. Vicky came up with that for me. You know, it helps. And anyway, if it weren't for her, I might have… Well, it doesn't matter. And I do have a chair. Yes, it's over there. Michael waved his hand towards where a pile of iron on wheels was stacked. It's old, been repaired 10 times, and it's useless. It keeps breaking. And a new one is very expensive, and you have to wait for a free one. So I sit and wait for it like a miracle from Santa Claus. The words of the handsome young man, sitting helplessly trapped within 4 walls, exuded such hopelessness that Anthony lowered his eyes. And when he raised them again, he blinked in surprise. A painting hung on the wall. At first, Anthony took it for a painted city landscape, a narrow street between old houses, a wet pavement reflecting the yellowish light of lanterns, and a solitary, thin human figure. And suddenly, Anthony straightened up and looked closer. The painting seemed to come alive, to stir. He even thought the little figure took a small step forward. Was he having hallucinations again? He glanced back at Michael in a panic. He nodded and smiled. Anthony walked closer and gasped. The painting was 3-dimensional. The houses seemed to protrude from the frame, like real ones, and it seemed that light would soon light up in the windows. A tram would turn the corner. Look, the rails gleamed between the houses, and the figure would jump in place and hurry about its business. In scientific terms, it's paper toll, a technique for creating 3-dimensional paintings, Michael explained to the astonished Anthony. And simply put, it's Vicky's little miracle. It's her painting. She gave it to me a long time ago. I just look at this street, and sometimes I feel like I'm walking on it myself, breathing the air after the rain, afraid of getting hit by a tram. My God, what happiness it is to be afraid of getting hit by a tram. Oh well, he decided to change the subject. How can this be? You've been staying with her for several days and haven't seen any of her paintings? Although yes, she doesn't keep them at home. As she once said, she's afraid of falling into narcissism. How can she have nothing left? She just makes them and sells them right away. She needs money for the boys, for all this charity of hers. And she also works shifts at the hospital, washes dishes in a restaurant, and I just sit. Michael pulled the pitiful remnants of his legs towards him and smiled. Can you imagine? She once said to me, Mikey, I've calculated, to buy you a new chair, I only need to make 86 paintings. I've already done 10, just a trifle left. Isn't she a fool? A few hours ago, Anthony had already heard Vicky called a fool, but then the shrill female voice boiled with misunderstanding, disbelief, and bitterness, so the word was poisonous, sticky. Now the crippled young man said it softly, affectionately, gently, and it sounded like a tender, touching, timid confession. Are you leaving soon? Brown-eyed Victor looked at Anthony seriously, intently. Tired of me, huh? The man nodded playfully at the boy. Getting in your way here. Yesterday I accidentally ate George's apple. No, it's just, I really love apples. Ever since I was little, I always ate several, even with the core. Anthony froze. Something inside his head violently surged, jumped, like a fish thrown ashore trying to get back to where everything is familiar and understandable, but losing strength, it quieted down again. That wasn't George's apple. It was mine. He ate his right away, actually. What does that matter? He heard Victor's voice and looked at the boy bunny in confusion. I'll give you all of mine. The twins will give you theirs too. Just don't leave us. At least not until New Year. Why? Anthony was amazed. I'm no use at all. Mom doesn't cry anymore, Vitya explained patiently and somewhat frighteningly because of the seriousness in his eyes. Ever since you came to us, she hasn't cried once. She thinks I don't see, and nobody sees. But I see, and no one should cry on New Year's. Everyone should be happy. Like us. Like me. Victor said the last words confidently. The little boy, born to be disadvantaged, held his head high, boasting about something he couldn't possibly have by definition. Happiness. Vicky. Anthony looked at her. That smell? So fresh. What is that smell? Oh, she was surprised. Ah, that's verbena. Always loved it. And it scares the boys away, like mosquitoes. If you use a little too much, they start sneezing and leave me alone. Anthony, what's wrong? He swayed, closed his eyes, and clutched his head. It buzzed. Verbena. Of course. The freshness of wet leaves and citrus. That's the smell of verbena. Mom, this is my gift, son. These are my favorites. Anthony, we're losing the contract. Deal with this immediately and personally. You're something, Klimov. 18,000 euros for a week's vacation. Only you could do that. And the reports will be there. That's what's expensive. I need to change my car. Or rather, you need to change my car. Tony, stop eating apples with the cores and stems. What is this really? You'll have stomach problems. The USA? That restaurant? Buy them off? Oh, let's go to the one where we had such a blast with those. Well, Mr. Klimov, one call from you, and the delivery is ours. Oh, Tony, you finally got those watches with diamonds. How much did you pay? How much? $500,000? Well, what do you know, it's basically fine. How can you live in this apartment? The split system here is terrible. Klimov, remember? The day after tomorrow, the whole company is flying to the Champions League final. 5 boxes booked. Snippets of phrases, voices, the roar of engines, the shouts of the crowd, the whisper of a computer, the roar of a racing car, the melody of a mobile phone, the clinking of silverware, the sounds of airport announcements. All this crashed down on Anthony like a mountain avalanche, swirling in his head chaotically, senselessly, as if trying to quickly take their places lost a few days ago. I remember, he gasped. I remember. I'm Anthony Klimov. I'm 34. I live downtown. I'm so happy for you. Her eyes shone. So happy. It's so wonderful to remember yourself. It's like you gave yourself a gift for New Year. She laughed. So, you have somewhere and someone to go back to? He nodded. Wonderful. A light shadow flickered across her face and disappeared faster than he could blink. Simply wonderful. Well, goodbye. We'll miss you. And please, don't forget anything else. She touched his cheek more with a sigh, a scent, a warmth than with her lips, and disappeared, as dreams are supposed to. born with a silver spoon in his mouth. That was him, Anthony Klimov. The boy, the only son of a very wealthy man, grew up, of course, in complete comfort, provided with everything imaginable. Especially after being left motherless at an early age, Anthony received an excellent education, polished to a blinding shine, and the position of future heir to a large firm. And along with that, he received a destiny, pre-planned down to the smallest detail, from which it was almost impossible to escape. However, the path was comfortable, luxurious, and evoked constant envy from others. When Anthony turned 30, his father completely handed over the affairs of the large company to him. And along with that, the duties of being the life of the party among a group of rich young businessmen, convinced that everything has its price, everything is sold and bought, passed to him. They sold and bought cars, companies, honor, clothes, foreign resorts, women, health, conscience, restaurants. Only Anthony suddenly began to notice that with the years the price grew, and what was bought became worse and worse. Life began to offer outright garbage, from which his head ached with longing and his heart grew indifferently cold. And then, at the very end of the year, there was a half-joking bet. When was the last time you worked so that you weren't just tapping on a laptop, yelling into a phone, and bossing secretaries around, but really with your hands? What can you actually do? Take away your credit cards, your supercars, you'll starve to death in a week, one of them started. I still remember your screams on the plane that people with illnesses should fly on separate flights. When was that? And anyway, that's not the point. I can easily live without money. Bet? Anthony held out his hand. Bet, his friend exclaimed. My driver's parents are just moving out of an old communal apartment. There's your place to live. Just remember, you give up everything. Your watch, your ring, your $1,000 sneakers, all your credit cards, phones, and we'll monitor your accounts. And you won't pull out my porcelain teeth, Anthony grumbled. That would be good, his friend laughed. All right, you convinced me. Until Christmas, on our Christmas trip. Deal? They shook hands in front of a large crowd of cheerful witnesses. So Anthony Klimov ended up on the outskirts, more like a slum than a city district, in an old semi-empty apartment with leaky pipes. He honestly lasted 2 days, so to speak, on his subcutaneous fat, and then, to get food, he almost got into a fight with stray dogs he encountered. He managed to get hired to unload a huge truck of groceries. Dragging another box, he slipped on a banana peel discarded by someone's shoe. He felt quick, rough fingers rummaging through his pockets and pulling off his not-so-great jacket from his shoulders. And then there was cold, darkness, and silence, pain and fear. The smell of verbena, the song about the little fir tree that's cold in winter, and an adventure the length of a small life. Gnomes and a handsome disabled man, a poor little apartment, a paper masterpiece on the wall, a lonely old woman, and the most delicious chicken broth in the world. But most importantly, huge shining eyes, a silver voice, and thin strong hands with protruding bones. You can't buy that with money. Or can you, after all? He arrived at the familiar house. He immediately saw Vicky. She was decorating a large, fluffy fir tree standing in the middle of the yard. Anthony, she exclaimed, her gaze sweeping over the huge black Jeep, the impeccable coat, the shining shoes, and she smiled. I see you really had something to remember. Yes, well, he said, not knowing what to do with his hands, his eyes, his whole self from the sharp feeling of being alien. How could this be? It had been so good just recently. People smiled at him. They loved him. Poor, sick, remembering nothing, he was one of them here and he was happy. And now? What now? Vicky seemed to guess his thoughts and asked, And what now? I wanted to. Thank you. He took a plastic card from his pocket. What is this? Her eyes asked. He had never seen such a look in her eyes, and he thought he had already studied all the shades of her eyes. Now they were gray steel, and he mumbled, Vicky, well, this is money. For you, for the boys. Well, for repairs, some clothes. No, don't think. There's a lot. Really a lot. You need money, I know you do. I do, she nodded, and the silver notes also disappeared from her voice. But not this kind, and not from you. Well, Vicky, let's not. And you did spend money on me. I ate and drank at your place for almost a week. What else? Is this for help? She repeated thoughtfully. Well, Thank you, of course. But I don't take money for help, or for friendship, or for… Anyway, I don't need anything from you. She shook her head and added with a smile, Well, I'll be. We thought you were a noble bandit, and you're just a rich shopkeeper. We were wrong. I was wrong, again, and it's a pity. He sat at the negotiations, as if observing the people from the side. Opening up? Just help? He loved her. How could you hurt someone you love? Or could you? What had he done? Of course, he had hurt her, insulted her. After all, feelings, real feelings, cannot be bought. They can only be received as a gift. How simple. Why did he forget this so quickly? How did he forget the disabled man trapped within walls, Granny Zoe, and the thin hands smelling of Mom's perfume? Idiot! Moron! Moneybags! Anthony gasped. You know, Mr. Klimov, the astonished interlocutor said, half rising, perhaps our terms are not the most suitable for you, but I would still ask you. Oh, I'm so sorry, Anthony laughed. I wasn't talking about you, I was talking about myself. I'll leave now, my deputy will sign everything. But I don't have time, excuse me, I have to run. So much to do. New Year is tomorrow. Time to make dreams come true. On December 31st, he patiently watched Vicky and her elderly neighbor untangle garlands together. Oh wait, Anthony, what are you doing? You're getting in my way. Oh no, you made me break a bulb on the garland. And we're all meeting at the tree this evening. Granny Zoe, don't dress the boys too warmly, okay? It's warm outside. Granny Zoe isn't coming to the tree. A car will pick her up in an hour, Anthony suddenly said. What? The women asked in unison, looking at him in astonishment. Yes, get ready, Granny Zoe. They'll pick you up, take you to the airport, and you'll fly to your son and his family to celebrate New Year. Your granddaughters are really looking forward to seeing you. They're making you presents. I called your son. He even dropped his phone in surprise. He'll meet you. But how? The old woman was flustered. Tony, I won't make it. I'll die. You won't die. Anthony nodded decisively. It's a private jet. There will be a doctor with you constantly with the necessary equipment to help you if needed. I'm flying. The old woman nodded decisively and even stamped her foot. No, not yet, Anthony thought. He hasn't earned this yet. I need to visit your neighbor on the first floor too. Michael. Anthony, limping, entered Michael's apartment, pushing a light, maneuverable wheelchair in front of him, which looked more like a modern, stylish minicar for one. This, of course, won't replace your legs, but you know it's an amazing thing. Maneuverable, light. Honestly, I rode in it for half a day myself. Everything is adjustable. Armrests, footrests, backrest, headrest. Mike, honestly, it's more comfortable than an expensive foreign car. And most importantly, electric drive. 50 kilometers on a single charge. I don't envy whoever goes for a walk with you. You'll wear anyone out now. And nothing bothers the wheels. Asphalt, snow, you could even go into the desert. Michael, oh please, it's just a chair. Walk, Michael, as much as you want, walk. Anthony felt his hand squeezed by surprisingly strong, warm, honest fingers. Well, are you getting used to the new equipment? He nodded to Michael's mother, who was flustered, disbelieving, not knowing whether to cry or laugh, but who had already shed her hopelessness and despondency somewhere. She looked at her son and openly admired him. We're waiting for everyone at Vicky's tree in the evening. New Year's coming soon. Finally, they gathered in the yard, by the tree shining with garlands, under a light snow. The boys, who were reluctantly pulled away from a pile of presents, Michael, incredibly handsome, with a confident gaze directed forward, obviously towards the distances he would roll in his new chair, his mother, who looked 20 years younger. Victoria. He had no one to compare her to, his beloved, and there was no need to. Oh, look who's here, not a speck of dust on him. Irene's inimitable, creaky voice rang out. Well, I'll be. So our foundling turned out to be a prince. Who would have thought? I didn't know. Otherwise I would have nursed you myself. She headed towards the entrance, throwing over her shoulder. Vicky, tomorrow morning, make sure all the firecracker papers are picked up. Get the prince out for the cleanup too, don't forget. Irene, wait! Anthony exclaimed, catching up with the neighbor. Wait, Irene, this is for you. He handed the woman a rectangular envelope. What is this? She stared at Anthony with suspicion. This is a certificate for a full day at a beauty salon. Massage, manicure, hairdresser, masks, what else? Lots of things, whatever you want. But remember you said, a whole day just for yourself, like a real woman? Well, there you go. Happy New Year. Irene looked at Anthony and Vicky, at the envelope with her beautiful feminine desires, at the little tree burning with lights. And it was unclear what was glistening on her cheeks, whether it was tears or melting snowflakes. Well, and what did Santa Claus give you? Vicky smiled. Nothing yet, he shook his head sadly. He needs nothing but what one young woman has. She won't give it to me. Either she doesn't want to, or she can't. She can, she whispered in a silver voice. She can, and she wants to. Very much. She's just shy. Everything is yours, and only for you. Take it, own it, play and rejoice. Just don't abandon it for long. Vicky and Anthony sat side by side, pressed close together in the yard, on the bench near the tree. Complete silence reigned around them, as if no one else was left in the world but them. However, all lovers think exactly that. Falling from the sky, sifting down like delicate, weightless snowflakes, was a quiet, light snow. The tree, shining with lights, swayed a fluffy branch, and Anthony simultaneously felt that a tall Santa with a white beard would peek out from behind it, shake his staff at them, and ask sternly, "And who is giving out presents left and right instead of me?" The snow fell quietly, making the world whiter, cleaner, and kinder. Worthy of New Year, undoubtedly happy and bright. "And I've figured out your secret," Anthony's whisper came. Vicky purred, pressing against his side. "It's very simple. If you want to be happy, make someone else happy." And somewhere far away, as if agreeing with him, the New Year's chimes struck softly, resonantly, joyfully.